What makes a cell functional? In reality, the cell is simply what carries out the life-supporting functions as indicated by the actual genomic sequences located within the nuclear envelope. Now what makes your brain functional? Nothing. Got him. If you interpolate, which is my new favorite word, which probably does not apply here at all, but whatever, if you move inwards versus outwards, you'll find that all of life really is just an expression dictated by something else. The genetics of a person needs a cell to carry out functions in order to make the genetics actionable and able to continue on. Sort of like how the body is needed to make the nervous system actionable and able to continue on. Otherwise, you would just be a brain sitting on the ground. Not really a long lifespan that way, I would imagine, but with this comes the question. If the genes are the important part, could other mediums be used in order to keep those genes viable? Well, hold on to your butts because with this one, we're just gonna get completely ridiculous. So with a serial killer escaping for half a second, he would be exposed to a genetic acid that would inadvertently destroy all of his cells and preserve his genome. The original plan was to bring back humanity in case something apocalyptic happened, but during the first human test ever conducted, he would be combined with the snow around him to become Jack Frost the Snowman. Yeah. It's close enough to Christmas, but I did have this idea of covering Home Alone and discussing how many times the wet bandits should have eaten it based on the sheer damage alone. Should be a fun one. But for this movie, let's discuss the feasibility of this genetic paste, as well as how it actually functions as we cover Jack Frost. We kick off our story with a happy, scary story being told about Jack Frost. You know, a horrific serial killer on Christmas Eve. But even with that said, okay, you guys know that one song talking about, telling ghost stories and tales of Christmases long, long ago? I think it's by Elvis. What is the deal with a ghost story on Christmas? Granted, I did cover Krampus on Christmas. Moving on. Jack would wake up, cut out people's stomachs, and in general just secure his spot on the naughty list, which that word has been absolutely ruined for me. Now bear in mind, this is an uncle telling this story to his niece. This is a canon event. My nieces have already heard completely cracked out stories from their uncle, me, but my brothers never watched his channel. So the ridiculous nonsense that I'm filling their kids' heads with, it will continue. Of course, there is a Michigan Dogman story I need to tell them, and how their uncle is going to go fistfight that thing in 2027. Granted, I had a great uncle go missing under mysterious circumstances in the Bermuda Triangle, allegedly, years ago. Maybe this is a story they'll tell people someday when I go missing. The mushroom coffee is hitting. So as a truck drives through to take Jack to his execution, apparently Prometheus was quite literally telling the truth about this guy cutting up people and putting them into pies. As Frost with a cut face asks for a smoke, the two drivers are huddled together insanely close as Harv calls back to see if everyone is doing fine. Jack then breaks the other convict's neck as they keep driving along. How did he escape his cuffs? Who knows? A man in another truck is pouring himself a drink while driving, as then they all lock up their brakes and the truck is sent careening down a hillside. In the crash, Jack is released as the other truck contains some sort of gene-melting material. Jack has made his escape from his chains as then he goes to take out the driver. However, as he talks smack, because of course he does, he is then sprayed with the liquid and begins melting into the snow almost immediately. Dissolving into absolutely nothing, his blood cells are combined with the snow as the officer then draws his force multiplier and pops him to no avail. Two other people then look at a clock as now it is midnight. Jack Frost should have been executed at this point. Flashing back into his memory, sepia colored of course, so that's how you know it's memory, a man then comes out of the woods. Oh dude, nice Firebird. You'd be forgiven also in thinking that this is a Camaro, but given the more rounded wheel wells, it looks like one. Can't see the taillights, but you know what time it is actually. Now, this was in 1975, not sure why my voice cracked, and this came just after the gas crisis, so everyone was really concerned about paying for a vehicle's fuel that burned at a rate of 6 miles per gallon. You could get the 250 inline 6 all the way up to the 455 in the Trans Am model. The 250 would give you about 155 horsepower, but the 455 would actually only give you around 200. Now, they say there is no replacement for displacement, but a 455 producing 200 horsepower to me will always be hilarious. For reference, a 2025 Honda Accord with a 1.5 liter, or even better, a 91.4 cubic inches as opposed to a 250 cubic inch or 455 cubic inch, which has 200 horsepower, will produce around 192 horsepower. Pretty crazy how things have changed. Now with Pontiac, it's alright. Can't say I'm a huge fan of Firebirds. And the 70s overall were just not a good time for vehicles, but people gaslight themselves into liking this era of vehicles, sort of like the Grand National in 1982. People swear by this thing, but looking at it, it's like, cool mom car, bro. But hey, if you like this stuff, more power to you. You were just objectively wrong. Your family, friends, and we all talk about you all the time in a denigrating fashion. Drawing the force multiplier on him asking for his license, he would be the sheriff that put away Jack Frost. Do you think maybe he put away Jack Frost because his name was Jack Frost. I mean, probably bullied all throughout school, for sure. It's sort of like, maybe if everybody just wasn't a douche to the Grinch, he wouldn't be such a douche. Anyways, coming across the accident from earlier, the driver then reports back that Jack was a part of the snow and he ran off, but he didn't have any legs. Random Fed then asked the driver to take a midnight stroll with him, and having dated a Fed adjacent woman, they really are this oblivious to standard human interactions. Nobody truly knows why they are the way they are. Just know what you're getting yourself into if you ever pursue one. And this is coming from a former scientist. You'd think I would be the one who wouldn't understand, I don't know, anything about this, but hey, let it be known that I do. Returning home, Officer Moody then talks about Jack Frost with his family as his son asks if he made him go away. His son then calls him a hero. Bro, go lift your PR next. This is absolutely life fuel right here, but while you do that, you know what you should be using? Your Raycons! But first, this episode is sponsored by Raycon. Black Friday is around the corner, and Raycon audio products are up to 30% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's the perfect time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. These early deals won't last long. Shop now before they're gone. It's time to keep your ears open and your holiday playlist rolling with Raycon's bone conduction headphones. They're great for staying alert on a job or just kicking back. And for Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you can save up to 30% on all Raycon audio products. The bone-conducting headphones, to me, are amazing. Like, I get how they work, but it's crazy how they actually function. Delivering off-the-ear audio, they send vibrations straight through your bones, which means you can hear the world around you. I'm using them actually right now to write this, and I can even hear my keyboard clacking, which means you can do things like run, craft, sitting on a bus, listening to the world around you, or whatever you want to do, or whatever you need to hear, you can do with these bone-conducting headphones. Plus, with their 13 hours of battery life and waterproof and dustproof design, what's not to love? So if you're in the market for some gifts for yourself or others this year, then go to buyraycon.com/RoanokeBC to get 30% off during Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So telling them the tree trimming is at 5, he then heads into work as over at the snowman building contest. Now, I can't be 100% sure, but for a fraction of a second, as it zooms in on the dad here setting things up, I am pretty sure that is an 80s Toyota pickup in the background that's blue. My God, beautiful truck. I can launch into another tangent, but all I can say is this. New Toyota trucks are great. Now, they're naturally aspirated V6s anyhow, but something about the first-gen Tacoma, Hilux, and older Toyota pickups, rugged little trucks. Hopefully the Scout doesn't suck when they come out with that one, but let's be real here, it's a modern truck. It's probably gonna suck. So as Officer Moody arrives, he then checks out the snowman as he asks everyone, how's it going? You know, small town. Walking over to the next area, they then talk about Jack Frost and how he was executed and how it's finally the end of a nightmare. Oh, I think we're just getting started. Tommy and Jill then flirt over the snowman that he has created as Officer Moody then heads into actual work. Hearing his son's voice in his head, he then pulls the food out of the trash and throws it into the cruiser. This will, I think, be important later. There's a lot of foreshadowing in this. Right, so future Roanoke here. Yeah, it's mildly important. Heading inside, burnt out hair is chain smoking inside of the sheriff's office, as then he asks if someone died by the expression on her face. So she holds up a piece of paper saying someone died. Old Man Harper, to be specific. Seemingly frozen outside, he just sat there as evidently he froze. Dangers of drinking outside, it seems. Or more likely, the reason, in real life, probably a murderous snowman. Calling it into the feds, the sheriff then asks if Jack Frost is really dead, as he's informed he did actually die in the accident as the fed talks to the geneticist saying it's starting. They hadn't tested any of this even on an amoeba, but on a human cell, there's now an issue. As they call in for some help, the cervical vertebrae has been snapped on Old Man Harper in the chair without bruising on his face, as he suggests possibly a large glove covered the face and then pushed the neck into the chair, breaking it. Meanwhile, back at Officer Moody's house, his wife comes home to find a snowman outside. Commenting on it, it turns out their son did in fact not build that thing. So who did? Over at the station, they already have a posse trying to form to deal with the issue over who killed Old Man Jenkins, or whoever it was. It's not important. They're all freaked out by the fact that maybe Jack Frost is back, as everyone agrees. This probably isn't a good thing. As the precocious son then heads outside to decorate the snowman, he gives him eyes and a nose before giving him a mouth, which immediately begins to form teeth. How did that go unnoticed? Who's to say? While he does, though, oh no. 80s gang of teenagers who want to sled in the sheriff's front yard and bully his son are here as they knock off the snowman's head. Do you know how absolutely unhinged you have to be to do this? In the sheriff's yard? No, actually, you know what? Most people in this movie have no sense of self-preservation, like, at all. So anyways, getting knocked down, one of the sleds completely cuts off the head of Billy. Ouchies. I guess for like half a second, you go into immediate shock, and really, it wouldn't be a major issue for very long. Wrapping him up in a body bag like some sort of messed up Christmas present, everyone was then yelling and arguing about Officer Moody's son being a total psycho. Well, considering his son just bit the dust, not Officer Moody's, but the other guy, Billy, bit the dust, the dad is actually handling this quite well. Grabbing the snowman's head, Officer Moody's son then reports the snowman pushed him, and that's going to put a damper on the Christmas spirit. So as the mom then makes some stew that night, Moody then looks through the letters that Jack sent him about how he's going to take him out, as they hear someone break in, or just someone on the front porch. Grabbing man's answer to the solicitor menace, which, by the way, if you ever see a sign on somebody's front porch that says no soliciting, that's actually legally binding. They can sue you or call the cops if you show up. So be aware of that. Anyways, mainly because I have people who keep showing up to my house and like they're trying to sell me things. Like, do you not see the sign? Leave me alone, please. Anywho, where was I? Ah, yes. So as he opens the front door and finds one of the store owners is there with the salt. You just brandished the Second Amendment because you thought someone was outside of your house? That's crazy work, brother. Over at a little off the top house, Jill then goes out literally a few hours after her brother just died. What is even happening? The old man is upset about that, but hey, what can you do? As the dad heads outside to smoke a pipe, an ominous snowman awaits. Smoking his pipe, he then hears it start talking to him, but assumes it's behind the snowman. Realizing it must be someone in the dark, he grabs an axe and just walks past the snowman. I would assume somebody is in the snowman. Turning around, Jack then slams the axe through his throat, saying he only axed him for his smoke. Oh, Lord, this is my level of joking. Is this what I'm doing to you guys? God. So as the mom then goes to pop a squat, the Christmas tree lights turn on, as then they shut off. I'm a bit confused as to how exactly these people are not mourning crazy style right now. Jack then appears as he strings up the mom and takes her out with Christmas ornaments, as she is now the star at the top of the tree, which is something I forgot to tell you earlier. She mentioned that. Saltman then comes into their house for some reason and sees this, as then he bails out and runs off. Meanwhile, the cops have already been called and show up to the scene of the crime. Great response time. As Officer Moody then heads outside, he tells Burnt Hair to call the FBI as the feds are already there. The feds ask if the murder victims have been moved, as then he will apparently head over there to check it out. The case is then taken out of Officer Moody's hands, as Saltman from earlier is just running away from the entire town. Agreed. Over at the new orphan's house, they then test the water and now find the snowman can melt and reform, so doors don't really keep this thing out. Discussing the man who was asked a question, the feds say they need to organize a curfew for tonight until the task force arrives. Hopefully in like 20 minutes. Heading into town, Officer Moody then tells the 12 townspeople here that they have a situation as the forensic pathologist turns on the heat to the building. Hearing a banging noise, the Saltman then starts knocking out snowmen out front, as then he gets randomly punched by the Fed. Well, that seemed a bit unnecessary, but he is a Fed after all. Being threatened by him, they then take the Saltman to jail and let him chill out for a bit.
All right, everyone, chill.
As Deputy Doofy then drives down the road, finding a snowman holding a stop sign. Actually, you can see the snowman's arm move, and then grabbing a snow shovel. For some reason, the snowman then melts as he enters the cruiser and then runs over Deputy Doofy because he couldn't get out of the way in time, or just lean up against the back of the car when it was backing up, or do anything that would have preserved his mortal coil, because that would be stupid. Back at the town center, Officer Moody attempts to keep everyone contained within the town hall area, but his wife has already bailed out to go get blankets. Seeing the cruiser outside, she then hears water as a pipe under the sink has exploded. Bummer, bro. Retightening the pipe, another deputy has arrived to get her, as the Fed then talks to Officer Moody about the plans in the town so that they can head this thing off the pass. Back over at the house, and then jump in the cruiser and head back to the town hall as he talks her ear off about water damage. Real. I flooded my house one time, accidentally installing a shower head on the second floor. That sucked because I went outside to turn off the water and realized that was filled up with mud. So I had to dig by hand while my house was flooding. Bad times. Outside though, Tommy and Jill are hanging out outside of the sheriff's house as they decide they have the best idea ever. Break in to the sheriff's house. Does Tommy not have his own house to go back to, or just do the standard teenager thing and just go hook up in your car? Why would this even be a top priority of places to go to? The sheriff's house. Stripping down because it's a horror movie technically, and they're wearing like 20 layers of clothing. She says he needs to build a fire and get some wine. Ooh, caribou. Again, inquiring minds wish to know, how exactly does he know where this stuff is, and why did they choose this house to break into? Realizing he needs ice, he then heads to the fridge to get some, as then he drops it into the wine. As he does, a snowball then hits the glass, thinking it may have been shots fired, and realizing what a tremendously idiotic idea it is to break into a sheriff's house that has PTSD from a literal serial killer, he then calls out to him saying he's not a burglar, which is exactly what a thief would say. Keep firing. I've never even heard of Tommy in my life. Grabbing an ice pick. Okay, bro, you assume this to be the sheriff, and that's what you grab. Absolutely brilliant. Checking the door, nothing appears to be outside of it, and then he whispers out as then he opens it and looks around. Immediately getting punched in the face, Jack yells, "It ain't Frosty." Well, it sort of is, as Jack then starts getting stabbed and fires an icicle into Tommy. Jill is finally ready, looking the exact same as earlier, as Tommy was already taken out by an icicle through the dome. So wait, so she blow dries her hair, right, and immediately gets back into another bath after assumedly taking a shower. All right, so getting the bath scene, I guess, the water is in fact Jack Frost, as he refreezes, holding her in a loving embrace. All right, well then he takes her out anyhow, and we don't need to examine where that carrot went, we're just gonna move on. So back over at the station, a storm is coming in from Denver. There is no way to get up to town apparently, as it's uphill 20 miles in both directions, in the snow, no matter what you do. That's what your parents told you. I'm sure that's a real thing. The Fed then tells Officer Moody he doesn't need to know exactly what's happening, but he starts asking about countermeasures. Yes, don't tell the only people that can help you what's actually happening. Brilliant. So the deputy's vehicle arrives, but they really don't see the deputy anywhere. Just an empty vehicle. Jack Frost reforms as the Fed then pops him from afar, but again, he's a snowman. Reforming immediately, they then run inside as they lock down the building as Officer Moody is finally informed the snowman is in fact Jack Frost. Looking under the door, the water is pouring in as the Fed then fires a shot, but it predictably does absolutely nothing. Officer Moody then grabs the heat gun and uses it to try to melt him, but it goes over about as well as a wet fart in church. Grabbing aerosols and then flood the room with it, as evidently I thought this was to prevent him from forming, but not really sure how they would have come to that conclusion, but who cares? Going for the key, Officer Moody here is afraid to grab the key as he drops it in the puddle of frost. Getting grabbed by him, they remember they left the salt man in there, as Officer Moody is able to free him. Okay, so the aerosol doesn't stop formation. Jack Frost now starts making money moves on the group as Officer Moody shuts the window on him, trapping him inside. Fed extraordinaire then pops the glass and blows up Jack Frost. But I mean, he's made of snow. So he immediately begins reforming, but reformed incorrectly for some reason this time. Inquiry minds wish to know how exactly. Here's the question surrounding that. If he melts anyways and can reform exactly how he needs to, why would blowing him up change any of that? He would just turn into water and then reform as per usual, right? Why am I trying to examine a movie about a murderous snowman so hard? That's the real question here. So Burnt Hair and Deputy get left outside as they just retreat to the deputy's house and will not really be seen any further past this point. Inside the town hall, Officer Moody then asks the geneticists what they are up against. Officer Moody then fires a shot by his legs, as then he's finally informed it was an accident. Essentially, an acid was created that would allow for the genetics of a person to be stabilized over an extended period of time so that they could be resurrected in the future if ever there was like a global holocaust. Great idea. Bad luck though, it was used on a serial killer first. The snow didn't just store Jack's DNA, it kept his personality and being, indicating that the human soul is evidently a chemical. Brings about some pretty profound questions concerning, well, basically everything. Although, is it really his soul, or more likely the chemical imbalances in his brain brought on by the actual genetics in the first place? But I will default to this guy's opinion, or probably not. This is a neurological condition, not a soul being a chemical one. Probably. I'm just a biologist, so what do I know? Well, I know enough that mental disorders are caused by physical structures in the brain and neurochemicals. Where did this guy get his info from? Again, why am I flexing on a movie about a murderous snowman? Anyhow, he thinks they cannot destroy Jack Frost. Well, not with that attitude. Officer Moody then says if they don't destroy him, then he would just keep trying to take everyone out in between him and the snowman. So a plan is then formed. Get the heater running and attempt to bring Jack in there and destroy him with the heat. Feeling the ground move, Jack arrives as they use a bunch of blow dryers to force him back into the furnace. As they do it, they're able to corral him into the heater as he begins melting down. So basically, like always, except this time apparently different, being converted to steam rather than water should in theory destroy the DNA of Jack, and yet we will get there. Officer Moody claims they iced him. Classic, because technically it's the exact opposite, as everyone then celebrates and immediately leaves without confirming their kill. Bad plan, brother. The Fed and the geneticists then stay behind as they realize he's reforming as Jack goes after the Fed, apparently taking him out with a face bite. Now, how did that kill him? Well, it's impossible to say if I'm being completely honest, unless it's one of those, like, it went far enough back to hit his brainstem or crack through the top of his skull into an area that we can't see. Otherwise, it just sort of looks like road rash. Going after the geneticist, he attempts to strike up a deal, asking him how it feels to be immortal, so Jack says it feels cold. Back outside, geneticist then comes out, walking by in an ungainly fashion, as then he starts throwing up Jack, telling them not to eat yellow snow for some reason. Jack then melts and then starts entering the car, telling his son not to touch the water. He tries to hotwire the car, but the engine is flooded. My God. Officer Moody then pushes his son out the window as he throws the oatmeal from earlier at him that his son put antifreeze in so that it wouldn't freeze. Brother, what? So as Jack stands there, he gets hit by a really nice truck. Looks like a 1978 or 1979 Super Cab F Series, I believe. This is how, objectively speaking, you are supposed to build these things. Put 33s or 35s on them, lift it around 3 inches, and these things are badass. And given that it's a Ford, it would come with either a 300, 302, 351, or 460. I choose to believe it came with a 460 V8 because that's way more fun, which would have given this bad boy around 220 horsepower with 350 pound-foot of torque for heavy towing. Of course, you get like 5 to 8 miles per gallon, which, it's not exactly ideal for long hauls, but hey, in the immortalized words of 50 Cent, it is what it is, dog. Man, life's not fair. Having been hit with antifreeze, it appears as though it turns this guy back into meat, I guess is the best way to put it. Telling Saltman to go get some more, Officer Moody then tells Jack he has no balls, as he's a snow woman, as Jack then starts trying to force his way into the building once again. Officer Moody then runs upstairs as Saltman goes and jacks some antifreeze. Not hearing anything, Officer Moody then goes to check out what exactly Jack may be doing, as Saltman fills up the back of his truck with antifreeze. Running away, Jack enters the room as he starts trying to stab Officer Moody with an icicle, as then he actually pierces his thoracic cavity. Grabbing Jack, he then jumps him into the antifreeze, holding him there, as then he starts turning into a god-awful conglomeration of meat and snow, as nobody attempts to help the officer. It's just like, nah man, you totally got it, this is all you. Having completely dissolved at this point, the arm is still active as then he dunks his son into the antifreeze. Better hope you didn't drink any of that, as it appears as though Jack is completely gone now. Pouring Jack back into the plastic containers, and, that should contain him. The rest of the FBI has finally showed up. Oh, thank God. The government is here to help. Putting Jack on the ground, some would claim he's still there to this day. And thus concludes Jack Frost. Welcome to the science portion. I bet you're sitting there currently thinking, Roanoke, there is no way you could explain how a genetic profile of a serial killer could ever be imprinted in the snow. And if you even try, I swear, to all that is holy, I will go to Reddit and write a dissertation on why you're a crackhead. Well, fire up those crack pipes, brother, because there is a way, and it's all based on man's bane of existence, organic chemistry. You see, organic chemistry and I go way back. It prevented me from graduating in the summer, actually, and I had to graduate in the winter because for some god-awful reason, that is organic chemistry. It's just horrific. But through my trials and tribulations, I learned what I needed to pass that course, and I told myself I would never use this crap again. Well, surprise, surprise, I started doing YouTube, and now I'm forcing that upon myself. So let's get into it. And if you're actually good at organic chemistry, I guess, cover your ears now, because this is obviously treading into the hypothetical area, we'll say. So first things first, I'm the realist. Second things second, we need to identify what this acid is actually doing in the first place. Not just to the cell, but to the actual genes contained within. This appears to me to be a molecular acid of sorts. Now you may be wondering, what's the difference? Well, it's important to remember that all acids are, they're molecular compounds in their pure state. However, in this case, there are ionic acids and there are molecular acids. Molecular acids are made of nonmetals and act as an acid when dissolved in water. Ionic acids are formed from a metal cation bonded to a polyatomic anion. So this starts trending dangerously close to chemistry, which I have a lot of strong suits in life, and I'm typically a jack of all trades beyond biology, but when we start getting into like chemistry itself, my eyes kind of glaze over. The chemists are beside themselves right now, but it's just how I feel. Anyhow, rep cellular and molecular biology for life, brother. The point here is that molecular acids, when dissolved in water, will actually break apart into a hydrogen ion, which is positive, and a negative anion, which is negative. And this is intrinsically what this entire idea is based upon. So at this point, you have a bunch of positive and negative cations and anions, which is exactly the same thing I just said twice. Cations being positive, anions being negative. They're all floating around. As the acid anions and the targeted cations are drawn together, this will actually disrupt the chemical bonds, causing a breakdown. From here, the now positive hydrogen will actually want to react as they do because their main goal is to blow up and then act like they don't know nobody. Or sort of like your boy being single for 3 minutes, coolest dude around, hangs out, super energetic, gets a girlfriend, never see him again. That's hydrogen looking to react with anything around it. And from here, this is what we see with the dissolving, I'm not really sure why I said dissolving of Jack Frost and the continued abilities he contains later on. As Jack Frost was exposed to this compound, nobody is going to sit there and look me in the eye and say, bro didn't just straight up dissolve. However, due to a hilarious amount of coincidences, several neck snapping, axe stabbing, hijinks ensue depending on how you look at it. As the acid would break down the outside of the cells by denaturing the proteins and disrupting the lipid bilayer by interfering with chemical bonds holding the lipid molecules together, the cell would immediately rupture. Now, this seems like a bad thing, because it usually is. However, there are other events at play here which can preserve life. The reality of what the geneticist was working on was not to save the cell in a traditional sense in case of a catastrophe, but to save the genetic profile of a person and keep it stable. So you may be asking why. Well, it may be maybe we're looking at cryofreezing completely wrong if you think about it. Currently, what we try to do is save the entire cell. The issue with this is the cell itself is really just a damaged copy because the genes themselves have been damaged. So it's theorized actually that Walt Disney is frozen under Disney World somewhere, which probably, I could see it. But by saving the cell entirely, the issue is that all of the issues that came with it after death are still present in those, and they really have to be worked over to be undone, which we actually do not have the technology for that right now. On the other hand, storing and saving the genetic coding may be much more easily accomplished if we, destroy the cell itself and get the gene. But now you may be thinking, well, Rona, wouldn't that just simply be a reproduction of the person? And to that end, yes, if you took just the coding of one cell and built an entire person off of that, which technically you could do. It most definitely would be a reproduction of the person. They would have no memories, they wouldn't know who they are, what they're about, or anything like that. They would just be kind of a template of that person. They would look the same. However, they are not building the genetic profile off of one cell, they are building it off of all cells. So they just have to get the outer cell matter out of the way in order to do so. And why is that? One word: epigenetics, which we'll get there momentarily on why this is important. Okay, so at this point, Jack is dissolving rapidly into the snow, to the point that even his blood disappears as a result of this, meaning everything is broken down, even, actual coloring of the cell, which I guess for skin would be melanin, but you know what? I know it's iron that makes it actually red, because, red blood cells, so I'm guessing the iron is also broken down. Pretty much everything is broken down. So basically you're just molecules and atoms, except for one thing, the genetic coding, which has a targeted interaction. This acid is likely built as intentionally to dissolve the phospholipid bilayer, which will burst the cell and then allow for the acid to bathe the nuclear envelope as well, destroying it in the process. And this would free the entirety of the DNA double helix structure contained within and then remove any surrounding enzymes that may interfere. So, where do we go from here? Easy work, brother. Remember the positive hydrogen atoms from earlier? Those would immediately attach to the negative phosphate backbone of the genome. Now, it's highly likely this acid has one portion of its structure as the actual hydrogen. In this way, it can attach to the genome of a person and then prevent any other interaction with enzymes or the environment actually just entirely. The genome would be effectively swaddled by this molecular acid, that was really hard to say, holding it in place and encapsulating it, which to the geneticist's point, mission accomplished, it worked, we did it, go have some tequila. So then what actually happened with Jack? See, it was not one cell that was destroyed to rebuild Jack, it was all cells. Bone, muscle, skin, neurons, it was all melted down, and a snapshot of that genetic profile at that specific point in time was taken, because then it was swaddled and it was not really changed past that point. So why does that matter? Well, it all goes back once again to our good friend epigenetics. Epigenetics is the process by which you can actively adapt to your environment instead of having to wait for random mutations and reproduction to do it for you. And by then you're pretty much dead anyways. While you are born with the genes that you have, and only time and mutations will actually change those, well, time induces the mutations, and I suppose so do viruses, should they implant your genome, like HIV. But anyways, how those genes are expressed, however, are a little more malleable, we should say, and this is by design. Let's say you're sitting there one day and you're like, dang, I really want to get swole like Papa Roanoke, and never mind the pictures that come up on screen, that was like 6 years ago and also 50 pounds ago. Anyways, your body will allow you to somewhat get swole like me. You'll never catch up, but maybe one day you'll get close. So while your build and potential for muscle gain may be better or worse than mine, depending on several factors, your epigenetic ability will allow for the myostatin genes to express more regularly. This in turn will increase your muscle and along with that, increase your strength. Of course, the first part of building muscle is simply your neurological systems recruiting more muscle fibers so that the initial bump in strength you get are actually more motor neurons innervating the muscle to use it more effectively. So mind-body connection is pretty much how that works. In other areas, epigenetics are expressing or repressing certain genes that are not so much strength-based, but are actually more impactful when it comes to memory. Remember, you have a stagnant amount of neurons for the most part. So then, how do we learn anything or even have memory in the first place? What is encoding? What is short-term versus long-term? And how is any of this even possible? When you see something or learn something, the neurons themselves engage in the process of epigenetics to alter how their genes are expressed. When this happens, patterns, memories, behaviors all become encoded into specific neurons who may have been expressing genes slightly different at a different point in time, but now have changed that in order to remember certain things. So you can kind of think of it like, let's say you're in a town. Everyone there is a neuron. They are born the way that they are, and they cannot really change. They can choose to do many different things, whether beneficial to the surrounding environment, detrimental, or just completely neutral. However, those behaviors and decisions do not change what they look like or their capabilities. And that is what epigenetics essentially are in the brain. Now, since we have a pretty good grasp on this idea, and I don't want to just beat a dead horse, that epigenetics is essentially just how genes are expressed and to what extent, how does this actually explain Jack Frost? Well, first, it shows that this geneticist is a total crackhead because this isn't a soul issue, it's an epigenetic issue. Next, we can move into the actual conversation about how the snow itself is used in this capacity. So, the actual structure of the acid is one that must be able to break down the cell by disrupting chemical bonds, which clearly it has done. It must also have a more positive section of the molecule that is then able to bond to the negative backbone of the DNA, and likely bridges to the other side as well. I wish I could actually draw this, but it would essentially look like, a string that bridges the two sides of DNA, and in the middle, there may be another portion of the molecule which is important, and it may also be probably negative to a degree as well. I don't think it would be positive, as that would be too many positive areas. Negative would make sense, but it really just depends. And for this to make any sense at all, you have to know what polarity is and a crystal lattice. Polarity is simply on a molecule when one side is a little more positive or negative than the other side. In physics, this is fundamentally what creates the hydrogen bonds necessary that actually holds water together. And this is why water is able to actually move against gravity should the flow of the water be unimpeded by pressure differences. Essentially, the hydrogen from one water is attracted to the oxygen of the other water and then follows it as it moves. In water, these bonds will create actually surface tension, but are typically easily moved away from one another due to the overall energy in the system, making those bonds a little bit more unstable. And then with steam, because there's a lot more energy, they're completely unstable, and then, they don't actually bond with each other at all. However, with ice, there is less energy, making these bonds more robust, and this creates what is known as a crystal lattice structuring. The ice still has the hydrogen attracted to the oxygen, but they get stuck in a repeating pattern, which then will create ice. And this is what's important to making the whole thing work. And also, if you want to know, well, why does ice float, but water doesn't float, I guess the best way to put it. If you actually look at ice, there's a lot of space, and this actually makes it more buoyant. But anyways, where was I? Okay, so you probably already figured out what's up with this, but we will kind of just talk about it anyways because that's why we were here. When Jack was melted down, the two positive sides of the molecule were able to bridge the gap and stabilize the genome, as well as protect it from degrading once moved outside the cell. From here, the negative internal portion likely can actually fill the role of the negative polarity that oxygen usually holds when it comes to water-forming hydrogen bonds. And this is on a molecular level about how Jack was able to, survive in the first place when it came to connecting to water. Due to epigenetics, slight changes in gene expression would have left the genes more accessible in different areas than in other areas. And when this genetic acid was applied, this would in turn cause him to have his genome stabilized and then effectively hydrogen bond with the water around him. Now, where this all went a little off the rails is the crystal lattice structure of ice. Typically, had he been in a warmer place and not around ice, or let's say he was in the middle of the ocean, the reality is his genes may have survived, but he would have just drifted off into places all over the planet and then just have been a part of the water cycle for the rest of his life, completely unaware of his actual consciousness because it would have been too broken up to even register anything going on. So effectively, he would have died. However, because of the ice in the immediate area, this had profoundly different consequences for him. Mixing with the ice, these connections gave him different abilities. The ice itself is fundamentally a substitute for cell functions, giving everything structure, I guess is the best way to put it. Whereas the cell itself would read the DNA and produce messenger RNA in order to build proteins and continue to give the body structure, it appears to me that this molecular acid operates in a way to transfer the small amount of differential charge that exists amongst the different genes from different cells that would in turn cause behavior downstream to be slightly altered using the molecular acid as a medium in which to influence the ice. But how then? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I was just going to exposition dump on you like you wouldn't believe anyhow, which is that's what I do in this channel. You guys are just here for me to exposition dump. Good lord, I'm messing up today. Anyways, it's a fairly simple concept, believe it or not. Let's say because you choose to eat mayonnaise every morning instead of eggs, 10 years into the future, you have been doing the same thing and somehow haven't died. Due to epigenetics and ingrained behavioral traits, which are quite strange, might I say, this has like a very minute impact on how genes are expressed. And as a result of this, the charge of the genetic structure in the cell may change very acutely. I believe it's acutely. I think I'm using that word correctly. So let's say true neutral is 1, right? Well, this would be like 1 with 0.25 zeros afterwards, and then a 1 instead of another 0. So it wouldn't be true neutral. It would be very, very slightly positive. Or it could be 0.25 nines with a 9 at the end. Incredibly small charge difference, again, with the 0.00 blah, 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 1 being positive and then the 0.9 being negative. But it is still there, and this is how the ice is influenced. This charge would not so much have a direct impact on the ice, but in turn it could have an impact on the massively sensitive molecular acid attached, and this in turn could cause the ice to behave in different ways in which we have seen. But also, well, how? Well, given that ice is simply a system with low energy that is hydrogen bonded, it appears as though the acid molecules may contain a certain level of energy that is able to overcome the actual bonds of the ice. This would be massively valuable, as clearly when it comes to body movement, the acid could cause some bonds to melt and others to freeze, creating counter movements to one another. And that is fundamentally how muscle works. You have an agonist muscle and an antagonist muscle, biceps and triceps sort of deal, quadriceps and hamstrings, I don't know, abs and spinal erector muscles, all that good stuff. The ice freezing on one side would push the arm because ice is naturally expansive, and the ice melting would actually naturally contract because the water would pull together a little more. And this is how movement is achieved based on the minute changes of the genome and the snapshots taken, because the bonds are actually shortening between ice and water. So then, how exactly does Jack still behave like Jack? Again, this goes back to what we learned, or if we learned anything in the first place. Epigenetics helps store and encode memories, behaviors, and proclivities in general. It's how we just don't behave like a cell the whole time, right? With him, however, even if the head is removed, the reality is it's kind of hard to differentiate between which cells were where when it came down to rebuilding Jack, which is why it was really stupid when he gets blown up. All of a sudden, he's like, oh, my head's on my side. It's like, why does that matter? Anyways, as a result, the DNA is simply interacting from all over the body, communicating via the molecular acid through minute charges, which then functionally become not only movement but communication to other DNA strands further away. Because that sounds weird. I mean, think about it. That's what our cells are doing with each other all the time. Hormones are simply one cell communicating to another cell because they need to tell them what's going on, so then the genes can basically react. That's what we're doing here. React. The genes can be read to react properly, I guess is the best way to put it. So it may be that given our body is literally littered with nervous system material, which is an incredibly strange way to describe that, but these same genetic strands would be primed to send the same information they always have. Now, how all of this changes is the idea when he loses a body part, right? What happens? Well, given that he doesn't run off an actual metabolism anymore, what really goes down is in the same area that exists until it's reconnected to the rest of him, or at least the larger portion of him after being cut off. He may be somewhat affected, but once rejoined, it brings Jack back up to full speed once more. When he needs to turn to water, the molecular acids simply melt the bonds that they were using and then use the water in between them to move through areas such as doors. So then finally, what's the deal with antifreeze? Well, hilariously, it literally confirms the whole idea that the ice is giving his body structure and makes him appear the way he is simply because of the physics associated with ice formation, and that it is actively being used to communicate. When exposed to antifreeze, the ethylene glycol will actually get in between the water molecules and disrupt them physically and prevent them from forming. This is why Jack just couldn't move out of the back of the truck, because every piece exposed to antifreeze would in turn be disrupted and make it impossible for him to move. Sort of like if you're trying to run and then your muscles were being actively cooked in your body while you were trying to run, eventually it would just straight up stop responding because you could not use Like, the information couldn't actually be reacted to, I guess is the best way to put it. So, the hand at the end also confirms that every strand of DNA behaves in the same way that contributes to consciousness, hence why it can exist outside of the main body. So in reality, Jack isn't dead within that antifreeze. He's just sort of waiting, non-communicating, in a form of stasis, probably completely unaware of what's even happening. And so, what of the soul being chemical? Absolutely not. The soul, if anything, would be ethereal, not corporeal. And if you take that line of thought, the soul is not corrupted by the meat. The anxiety meat within Jack's skull was likely already messed up from factory. Given his aggression, like obviously his amygdala was messed up. Something's wrong with that boy's medulla oblongata. And murderous tendencies, it's clear genetically he was already pretty messed up from the beginning, meaning baseline, he was likely going to become exactly what he already was. Then based on choices, epigenetics came into play, which further solidified that these actions would become expressed later when the molecular acid interacted with the ice, turning him into a murderous snowman. Wow, I cannot believe I just explained that. Hopefully you feel that wasn't too ridiculous, but after all, it is near Christmas-ish. We're going into Thanksgiving, but you get what I'm saying. We all know why we're here, and even more to the point, me being Roanoke, I have to come up with some cracked out theory as to why things work, because this is my job. What a job. If you enjoyed, then please leave a like, as it helps get the video out there. And subscribing helps us finally crack 1.2 million subs. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales channel link, and other stuff in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. Next up at the Astrophysicist here, we have Death Dancer, Myura, and Webitron Supreme. Thank you guys as well. And at the Scientist here, we have Stutz, Frank Shaft Crank, I actually love electric cars, the Anglerfish, which is a patron, not my personal feelings, Metric System, Invictus Echo, Official Texan, and the homeless guy on the street. Thank you guys as well. And the rest of my patrons, I really do appreciate y'all's support. It goes a long way towards helping out. It's never expected, but definitely appreciated, so thank you guys. All right, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed. I think I'll have one more video out before Thanksgiving. We should, and I will see y'all in the next one.